that confidence does not conflict with caution. To some people, perhaps, what we philosophers say will appear impossible. But let us investigate all the same, whether it's true that in our daily lives we can act with both caution and confidence. It seems impossible because the two are evidently opposites, and opposites, supposedly, cannot coexist. But what most people consider strange, I think, can be explained on the following hypothesis. If we are talking about using confidence and caution on the same objects, we might fairly be accused of trying to reconcile irreconcilables. But our claim does not involve anything so strange. We have often said and shown that the use of impressions represents for us the essence of good and evil, and that good and evil have to do with the will alone. And if that is true, then nothing is impractical in the philosopher's advice. Be confident in everything outside the will, and cautious in everything under the will's control. For if evil is a matter of the will, then caution is needed there, and if everything beyond the will, and not in our control, is immaterial to us, then those things can be approached with confidence. And so, you see, that's how we can be cautious and confident at the same time. And, in fact, confident owing to our caution. For, being on our guard against evils, we approach things whose nature is not evil in a spirit of assurance. Instead, however, we act like deer. When deer are frightened by the feathers, they seek safety in the hunter's nets. Confusing ruin with refuge, they come to an ill-timed death. Similarly, fear afflicts us in matters outside the will's control, while we act confidently and casually in matters dependent on the will, as if they were of no importance. To be deceived or rash, to act shamelessly or with unbridled lust, none of this matters to us as long as we have success in affairs outside the will. Death, exile, pain, and ill repute, there you will find the impulse to tremble and run away. So you would expect, when error involves the things of greatest importance, our natural confidence is perverted into rashness, thoughtlessness, recklessness, and shamelessness. At the same time, all fear and agitation, we exchange our natural caution and reserve for meekness and timidity. Transfer caution to the will and the functions of the will, and the mere wish will bring with it the power of avoidance. But if we direct it at what is outside us and is none of our responsibility, wanting instead to avoid what's in the control of others, we are necessarily going to meet with fear, upset, and confusion. Death and pain are not frightening. It's the fear of pain and death we need to fear, which is why we praise the poet who wrote, "Death is not fearful, but dying like a coward is." So be confident about death, and caution yourself against the fear of it. Just the opposite, in other words, of what we are doing now. Now, we shrink from death, whereas our views about death hardly concern us. We hardly give them a thought, and are completely apathetic. Socrates used to call such fears hobgoblins, and rightly so, just as masks scare and frighten children, since they haven't seen them before. We react to events in much the same way, and for much the same reason. What is a child? Ignorance and inexperience. But with respect to what it knows, a child is every bit our equal. What is death? A scary mask. Take it off. See, it doesn't bite. Eventually, body and soul will have to separate, just as they existed separately before we were born. So why be upset if it happens now? If it isn't now, it's later. And why now, if that happens to be the case? To accommodate the world's cycle, because the world needs things to come into being now, things to come into being later, and it needs things whose time is now complete. Pain, too, is just a scary mask. Look under it and you will see. The body sometimes suffers, but relief is never far behind. And if that isn't good enough for you, the door stands open. Otherwise, put up with it. The door needs to stay open, whatever the circumstances, with the result that our problems disappear. The fruit of these doctrines is the best and most beautiful, as it ought to be for individuals who are truly educated. Freedom from trouble, freedom from fear, freedom in general. The masses are wrong to say that only free-born men are entitled to an education. Believe the philosophers instead, who say that only educated people are entitled to be called free. I will explain. What else is freedom but the power to live our life the way we want? Nothing. Do you want to live life doing wrong? No. Therefore, no one doing wrong is free. Do you want to live your life in fear, grief, and anxiety? Of course not. So no one in a state of constant fear is free either. By the same token, whoever has gained relief from grief, fear, and anxiety has gained freedom. What confidence, then, can we have in our own dear legislators when they say that only free-born people are entitled to an education, when the philosophers contend that only people already educated can be considered free? God will not allow it, you see. What about a master who performs the ceremony of manumitting a slave? Is nothing accomplished by that? Certainly it is. The master has performed the ceremony, and, on top of that, he has paid a 5% tax to the state. But his slave, hasn't he come by his freedom in the process? No more than he has instantly come by peace of mind. I mean, consider your own case. You have slaves, and the power to free them. But what master, I wonder, do you yourself serve? Money? Women? Boys? The emperor or one of his subordinates? It has to be one of them, or you wouldn't fret about such things. This is why I so often repeat to you the need to think about them and have these thoughts ready to hand, namely, the knowledge of what you should treat with confidence and what you should treat with caution. That you can treat with confidence whatever lies outside the will, but must treat with caution what lies within. But you say, "Didn't I read to you, and didn't you take note of my performance?" I noticed your clever phrases, yes, and you can have them. Show me instead how you practice desire and aversion to get what you want and avoid what you do not want. As for those treatises of yours, if you have any sense, you will go and burn them. But wasn't Socrates a writer, and a prolific one at that? Yes, but for what purpose? Since there wasn't always someone available whose ideas he could examine, or who could examine Socrates' own in turn. Sometimes he would test and examine himself, forever subjecting to scrutiny one assumption or another. That's the writing of a real philosopher, whereas pretty phrases in dialogue form he leaves to others, ascets and idlers, who lie about and have no patience with logical reasoning because they're too stupid. Even now, if the opportunity presents itself, I know you will go off to read and make public those compositions, and you'll pride yourself on being fluent in the dialogue form. Don't do it, man. What I would rather hear from you is, "Look how I don't fail in my desires or have experiences I don't want. I'll prove it to you in the case of death. I'll prove it to you in the case of physical pain, in the case of prison, of condemnation, and ill repute." That's the real test of a youth fit to finish school. Forget about that other stuff. Don't let people hear you giving public recitations, and even if someone praises you, restrain yourself and be content to look like a nobody or know nothing. Show them this, though, that you know how not to fail in your desires or experience what you don't desire. Let others practice lawsuits, solve logical puzzles or syllogisms. Your duty is to prepare for death and imprisonment, torture and exile, and all such evils with confidence, because you have faith in the one who has called on you to face them, having judged you worthy of the role. When you take on the role, you will show the superiority of reason and the mind over forces unconnected with the will. Then that paradox will no longer seem so paradoxical or absurd that we should be confident and cautious at the same time. Confident in relation to things outside the will, cautious about things within.